rope would get them off the hook for harboring a criminal. Then he said he'd leave as soon as he could, but Ruth said he didn't have to because there were no trains on the weekend. Then she ate her breakfast, which was surprisingly good. Frank realized that Ruth was willing to continue helping him, so, in return, he took it upon himself to do what he could. He mended the house, replaced the old car fuses, and even cleaned the whole house. In his spare time, he would play with Henry and patiently teach him how to play baseball. Just like a father, he was a family man, and now he felt more at home here than he ever had before. He cherished every moment he spent here, and by doing so, the mother and son have unknowingly recognized his presence. Looking at Ruth, who was carefully mending her trouser legs, and comparing her to his slutty wife, Frank's heart rippled. What a wonderful woman who never fooled around and always thought of her family. He couldn't help but ask Ruth about the scar on her lace, and the air was warm. But suddenly there was an urgent knock at the door and the atmosphere became tense. Frank strangled Ruth from behind and told Henry to get rid of her. Henry did. Luckily, it was just an old man from the neighborhood dropping off peaches and reminding them not to go out when there was a murderer in the neighborhood. Although Henry was very nervous, he managed to get rid of the neighbor by playing it cool, and Frank couldn't help but praise him for doing so well. Like a child who has received praise from his father, Henry's face was filled with joy. Ruth had read her son's mind at once, and knew that he had longed for a father like Frank. She didn't stop him, for Frank's arrival did bring life back into the house. Looking at the basket full of peaches, Frank took mother and son to make his favorite fruit plate, showing them every step of the way. It's a cozy scene, like a family of three, and every time she touched Frank, Ruth couldn't contain her excitement, even to the point where she couldn't stop shaking. Henry could see that his mother was in love with this man. The peach pie was deliciously baked, and as the food heated up, so did their relationship. This time Ruth snuggled into Frank's side and Frank slowly put his hand on Ruth's waist. Ruth didn't refuse and rested her head on Frank's shoulder. She enjoyed the moment and realized that she had fallen in love with this man, and so did Frank. That is, until the police car patrol passed by outside. It was a good time to leave, and Frank said goodbye, but neither mother nor son could bear to let him go, who was already reluctant to leave. Stays with them. That night, Ruth gave herself to Frank. Henry was happy to have a new father, as if he had been reborn. Frank took over all the dirty work in the house and tried to be a good father and husband. He would teach Henry many life skills and give Ruth the romance she deserved. He did everything he could except walk the streets with them at sunset. Because of him, Ruth, who had been lonely for so many years, was happy again, and Henry realized how good it was to have a father. The whole family was made whole by his presence and filled with happiness, and love made both of them look younger, and they wanted time to last forever. But Frank was a fugitive from justice, and Ruth didn't want to lose that happiness, and neither did Frank. They talked it over and decided to run away together to Canada, where English was spoken and no visa was needed. They told Henry about their decision and he agreed. The next day they started to pack their bags, but Henry suddenly ran away to say goodbye to the girl he loved. But the girl, hearing of his sudden move to Canada, cleverly surmised that the fugitive was at his house. In a moment of panic, Henry confessed the secret, but he was sure she wouldn't tell. On the other side of the table, Frank noticed that Ruth was panicking. He reminded her that it was not too late to be sorry. Ruth didn't hesitate to say it was the one thing she didn't regret, but she was afraid that since she'd had Henry, she'd had 5 miscarriages in a row and would never be able to have another child. She'd become depressed, and she loved Frank and feared that she wouldn't be able to give him a child. Hearing that was the reason, Frank was comforted by the fact that he didn't mind having her and Henry with him, which was what he really thought. Ruth, too, was becoming more stable, but the escape was not to be a happy one. Early the next morning, Henry sneaked out again to deliver a farewell letter to his own father, but on his way back, he ran into a police car on patrol, and seeing that it wasn't safe for him to be alone, the officer insisted on taking him home. Henry had no choice but to get into the car. When she saw Henry get out of the police car, Ruth got nervous and the policeman saw his luggage in the car. To cover her tracks, she hurriedly explained that she was on her way to sell groceries. The policeman said nothing, made a token round and left. Upstairs, Frank saw the scene and thought he couldn't delay any longer, so he told Ruth to go to the bank and withdraw the money and leave. But the one-time withdrawal of a large sum of money was met with all sorts of questions from the bank staff. Ruth was so nervous and incoherent that the banker got the message, and that she's taking the kids to school. He's not sure if she recognizes him. After sending the woman away, the mother and son return. At this moment, every second they stay is a second more dangerous. Time was of the essence, but as soon as he heard that his father had called and left a message, Henry insisted on returning the call. But then the sound of countless sirens from far away stopped them in their tracks. Ruth panicked. She wanted Frank to run away. Frank, realizing there was no way out, hugged Ruth tightly and told her not to be afraid. He tied Ruth up again so she wouldn't get involved. After kissing Ruth goodbye, Frank walked out of the house and turned himself in. No one knows how the police were able to locate him, except that he added 10 years to his sentence for escaping from prison. Ruth went to a lawyer to defend Frank, but he told her it would be useless and she'd be convicted of harboring him. Then she visited Frank in prison and wrote letters to him, but she never got a response. Frank wouldn't accept the visits or answer the letters. Ruth knew that Frank was trying to make her forget about him and get on with her life, but she never wanted to give up. More than 20 years had passed and Henry had opened a bakery, and the sign was the same fruit pie that Frank had made in those days. One day he received a letter from the prison. It was Frank. He was about to be released from prison and wanted Henry's advice on whether he could go to his mother. Henry answered the letter without question, knowing that his mother had been waiting for Frank. She'd never left the old house for over 20 years so that Frank could find her when he got out. After 25 years, the two embraced again, and this time they would never be apart again. Some people fall in love with more than one person a day, while others find the right person and stay with them for the rest of their lives. It's not about right or wrong. I just hope the right person meets the right person.